Good morning and welcome to Southside Online. If we haven't had the chance to meet, my name is Bailey. I have the pleasure of working with students and their families in transit, our middle school environment. To those of you joining us for the first time, we're grateful that you're here. You can head to our website to learn more information about our church. We'll be together for about an hour today. We're going to sing together and hear a message from our teaching pastor, Stanley, about serving. So, whether you're joining us online or in person, we want you to know one thing. God is for you, simple as that. He loves you and invites you into a relationship with Him wherever you are on your faith journey. That invitation also extends to the students in your life. Braden, who's a student here and a dear friend of mine, is a small group leader with us in transit. We got the chance to talk with him, and I can't wait for you to hear about his story later on. Now, we're going to get the opportunity to sing together. It's a time for us to connect with God and learn truths about who we are and His love for us. If you don't know the songs, the words will be on your screen. Let's sing.
rejoice together in the power of the presence of our Father this morning. Say, where was the darkness? Oh, where was the darkness when hope was restored? And where was despair when my God split the shores? And where was defeat when the Lord took a breath? When he stood in power by the grave that he left? Nowhere, 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 nowhere is the fear when my King resurrects. Nowhere, 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 nowhere is the doubt when my King conquered death. Hey! So where was the sorrow? Yes, where was the sorrow when dry bones arose? And where was the pain when the sick touched the road? And where was disgrace when the King laid to rest? The stronghold of sin by the grace he possessed. Nowhere, nowhere, nowhere is the fear when my King resurrects. Nowhere, nowhere, nowhere was the doubt when my King conquered death. But nowhere, nowhere, nowhere is the fear when my King resurrects. Nowhere, nowhere, nowhere is the doubt when my King conquered death. Let's declare this together. I see joy. Yes, I see joy rising. I hear hope calling. I see fear hiding. I hear chains falling. I see walls shaking. I hear doubt running. My God's on his way. Yes, he is coming. Yes, I see joy rising. I hear hope calling. I see fear hiding. I hear chains falling. I see walls shaking. And I hear doubt running. My God's on his way. Yes, he is coming. Here, now here, now here in his presence, my shame disappears. Now here, now here, and I stand undefeated when Jesus is near. Now here, now here, now here in his presence, my shame disappears. Now here, now here, yes, I stand undefeated when Jesus is near. I see joy, yes, I see joy rise.
Hey, I want to welcome all of our Atlanta area churches and those of you who are watching all over the country, different parts of the world, actually. It's so fun to have a growing community of men and women and children and students and people of all ages who are learning that it's not simply about what we believe, it's about what we do with what we believe, because Jesus said doing makes the difference. And so we're thrilled that you're part of this community. As you might imagine, I absolutely love the local church. I love the church because it's a big part of my story. I'm a preacher's kid. Let me tell you about preacher's kids. We've seen the best and we've seen the worst, and we've seen the worst of the worst of the worst. And a preacher's kid who still loves the local church, there must be something going on because we've seen it from the inside out. Preacher's kids, we see things different when the room, people walk away from a church service and say, I just felt the Spirit of God. And the preacher's kids are going, no, the room was full. Put that same number of people in a room 4 times that large, you won't feel a thing. So anyway, we have a tendency to see things for how they are. We have a tendency to ignore all the hype. And and in spite of being a preacher's kid and growing up in the church, I absolutely love the local church. And when I say I've seen the best and the worst, let me tell you about the worst. When I was in the 8th grade, true story, when I was in the 8th grade, Wednesday night service, my dad's sitting up on the platform because in the Baptist church, we had those thrones. Remember, we had the 2 big thrones and the 2 mini thrones. It's so weird. But anyway, things were different, okay? I'm sure one day somebody's going to make fun of, they had these televisions on, what were they thinking? So I get that. And so this guy who's a deacon got up and starts making an announcement, and he didn't like my dad, and he uses profanity standing behind the pulpit on a Wednesday night, we're having Wednesday night service, and I'm sitting about 6 rows back up in the 8th grade. I remember the word he said. I won't repeat it, even though we're in church and he was in church. And this is in the late 70s, okay? We don't use profanity now, the late 70s. And my dad walks up beside him. He's the guy standing in the pulpit. My dad walks up beside him, and he says his name. I still remember his name. He said, we're not going to have that kind of language here. And he looks up at my dad, a little shorter than my dad, and says, you better sit down or you might just get punched. I'm not making this up. I told you, best and the worst. Okay, it's amazing I'm sane or a Christian. And my dad just stands there and stares him down, and this guy turns and hits my dad in the jaw in church. And I still love Jesus, okay? So the point is, you've had some bad church experiences. You have never seen your father slugged in church and on the platform. So whatever your bad church experiences, mine is the worst. And I still absolutely love the local church because, do you know the lesson from all that, and all that was for me? Is that some things are worth fighting for and some things are worth suffering for. And the local church is one of those things. Specifically, the mission and the message of the church is so important. And in some ways, and I think one of the reasons I love the church is in some ways the church saved my life. And I don't mean I got in a lot of trouble and there was some intervention. It wasn't so much intervention as much as it was prevention. That growing up in a good, practical Bible teaching, here's how you live it out church, saved me and kept me from all kinds of things. I would say I can't imagine where I'd be without the influence of the church. But the truth is, I can't imagine where I would be without the influence of the church and without the people in the church that poured into me and invested in me as a teenager and as a college student. If suddenly, and some of you feel this way as well, if suddenly everything that's in me and about me that as a result of the local church, if all of that suddenly was just vacuumed out, just disappeared, I would be a mess. Specifically, the church did 4 things for me that shaped my life and saved me from all kinds of, stepping on all kinds of landmines, all kinds of regrets. And first of all, the local church, growing up in church, it informed my conscience. I avoided so many moral and so many ethical landmines because of how the church and the teaching of the church, because we had a very practical church where my dad taught practical sermons and student ministry the same way. It just kept me out of so much trouble. One of the early, I know this is kind of simple, but I was thinking through my childhood in church. One of the basic things I learned in church, and I don't know where else you learn this, one of the basic things I learned in church in middle school and high school, because we'd have these great camps and great teachers, was that I should treat women the way I would want someone to treat my sister. That I should always treat a young lady when I was dating, and I should always treat women the way I would want somebody to treat my sister, because they're probably somebody's sister and they're somebody's daughter. That one simple lesson alone set guardrails for my behavior and guardrails for my conscience. I'm so grateful for that one simple lesson. But the church informed my conscience. The church informed my conscience that you should never mistreat anyone for any reason. You should never mistreat anyone for any reason. Again, this became part of my conscience as a kid because of the local church. I'm so grateful for that. The other thing church did for me, the second thing, was it instilled a sense of purpose in my life. It taught me that I was created on purpose with a purpose. And here's the biggest lesson, and I'm not the purpose. That I was created for a purpose, with a purpose by God. But that I'm not the purpose of my life, that God has a plan for my life, but it's bigger than me and it's not even about me. And I'll be honest, there were times I wanted God to show somebody else his purpose for their life and leave me alone because I sort of figured my purpose out, and it was at odds with God. But I'm so glad my conscience was wound up and informed by the fact that, no, Andy, God has something for you. He has a plan for your life, and you don't want to miss it. And my dad instilled this in me. I've told you this before. Every night I would pray, God, show me your will for my life. Show me your will for my life. And even at this season of my life, honestly, I still pray, God, show me your will for my life. That there's a purpose and there's a plan, and I don't want to miss it. And God has a plan for your life. And God has a plan for your lives. And you don't want to miss it, right? I had mine all planned out at times, right? And God's like just nudges me back. The third thing, and this is such a big deal, the church served as a window into God's activity in the world, as in God's activity in the whole world. The church exposed me to a world that was so much bigger than my world. That God didn't just have a plan for me. God has a plan for everyone, and God had an agenda for the whole world. I'll tell you where my eyes were first opened to this, kind of an interesting story. When I was 21, I guess, I'm 20 or 21, Louis Giglio and I, we've been friends since the 6th grade. We grew up in my dad's church, and we were invited to go to Canada to a conference put on by a missions organization, and they had to meet in Canada because some of the guys in different parts of the world were not able to get access to the United States. They couldn't get in the United States, they had to go to Canada. It's a long story. So there's about 50 missionaries literally from all over the world, some countries we'd never heard about before, some dangerous countries to be a missionary. This would be the last time this group of men, it was all men, this is the last time this group of men would ever get together, because some of them, when they went back, they wouldn't be allowed to leave their country again. And so we were 20, 21 years old, and we got invited. It was put on by an organization, and the head of the organization was a guy named Ian North. He was from Australia. So Louis and I get to Canada. Neither of us really understand why we got invited, how we got there. These guys are all way older than us. And they're from all over the world. Again, Burma, the Sudan, just all kinds of places. The second day of this conference, they decided to have a prayer meeting. And we're outside. I don't remember why we're outside, but we're outside. There's picnic tables, and we're all kneeling down. And Ian North, he's from Australia, begins praying. And for those of us in the U.S., anybody who has that South African or Australian accent, they just sound smarter than the rest of us, right? So I just think God's probably taking this prayer more seriously because it's just so powerful. And Ian finishes praying. And then Pastor Uwan La from Burma begins to pray in his language. And I still remember Louis and I looking up, opening our eyes and looking at each other, and it dawned on me, and probably on him for the first time, that English is not God's first language. That English isn't God's only language. That our God is as big as the world and is active all over the world. And we heard stories that week that just put us to shame in terms of our faith. There were 3 of us in this dorm, it was this camp. Louis and I roomed with a guy named Naji Kanaji from the Sudan. Naji had literally been beaten for his faith and had scars to show it for it. And it just changed us. Suddenly God got bigger, the world got bigger, the church got more important. The church introduced me in this, when you talk about, understanding or seeing the world, the church introduced me to people with far fewer things, but more joy and more faith and way more gratitude. The other thing the church did for me that I hope the church does for you is the church taught me to be generous. Not how to give, that's different. Everybody gives. The church taught me how to live generously. My parents, when they gave me my allowance as a kid, we got 10 dimes. So we could take 1 dime, put it in an offering envelope, and take it to church. I've always tithed. Being generous to me is so easy. And it's not because I'm a good person. It's not because I'm a better person. It's not even because I'm a generous person naturally. The church taught me how to be generous. My first job was at Winn-Dixie. When I turned 16, my dad gave me the keys to my mom's 4-door Catalina and said, go get a job. So I went and, that's so hard. So I found a job cleaning the meat department at the Winn-Dixie in Tucker, Georgia. Georgia, which meant I got there in the afternoon and I stayed till everybody was gone. If the inspectors came, I was there to who knows when. I had, it was not the greatest job, but I learned to clean the meat department and made $2.92 an hour, and 10% just boom, just went to the local church. That's just the lifestyle. And I'll never forget this. I remember the first time I ever gave $100 away. So this is in the late 70s. Sitting in church one Sunday night, and my dad would do this thing where, people would come forward, do an invitation. And every once in a while, this wasn't normal, but every once in a while, somebody would come forward with a need, and he would stand the person up and say, hey, this person has this need, and explain the need. And that night in church, I still remember her name, a young girl named Terry Bailey. Still remember her name. She was a nursing student at Georgia Baptist, nursing school. And he stands her up and says, this is Terry Bailey. She's trying to raise her to get tuition for school, tells the whole story. And I'm just kind of sitting there. The service is over. I'm like, let's go home. And suddenly out of nowhere, this thought passes through my mind. You should give her $100. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know where that came from. Anyway, so, what time is it? $100? Are you kidding? That's like, I don't know how much that is like now, but I mean, when you're making $2.92 an hour, $100. And the other, I remember, how there's certain thoughts, it's like you can just relive them the way they were. I remember thinking, in my checkbook, most of you don't know what that is. I won't take time to explain it. But anyway, I remember thinking my checkbook is in my car. I don't even usually carry it around with me. And I'm like, shake it off. Nope, $100. You need to give that young lady $100. She's like 3 years older than me. Just we're sort of in the same season of life. So I went out to my car, got my checkbook. I thought when I get back in there, she's probably gone, and she's there. And I gave away $100 because she needed it and I had it. Those are kind of the defining moments that really are defining moments. And so many of those happen within the context of the local church. That's why I say it saved me. It's who I am because of the influence of the local church. The church taught me what I've been trying to teach, all of you all these years. That's where I learned to give, save, and live. Give, save, and live. You give first, you save second, and you live on the rest. And I've been doing that since, before I can remember. My first 10 dimes, a dime goes to the church. But the thing is, it's not because I'm a great person. It's because the church instilled this in me. It never occurred to me that I had the right to live off 100% of my income, ever. And it kept my hands open. The bottom line is simply this. I mean, my little, jog through my church past. There's so many more stories. It's really this. And I didn't have this language back then. I don't want to pretend. But the church made me a better person. Following Jesus, as I say, it made me better, and it made me better at life. It made me a better person. So about 5 years ago, we were doing some wordsmithing of some things around here, and it just dawned on me, I should have like an elevator pitch for my faith. I mean, nobody walks up to me and says, Andy, why are you a Christian? I mean, I wish they would, because, man, I can razzle-dazzle you with, stuff about the resurrection all day long until you either just give up and become a Christian or walk off, okay? But I needed like the elevator pitch, like what's the short message? Why am I a Jesus follower? And that's when I came up with this language, because honestly, it's not because, of some theological insight. It's not because one day I'm reading through the whole Bible and boom. The reason I'm a Jesus follower is honestly because following Jesus has made my life better, and it's made me better at life. So, of course, I love the church. But the church isn't just good for me, and the church isn't just good for you, and the church isn't just good for us. The church is good for the community, and the church, as I said, is good for the nation and for the world because, and if you don't get anything else out of today's message, even if you're not a Jesus follower, not a Christian, you've had a bad church experience, not as bad as mine, but you've got your own bad church experience. In fact, it may be worse than mine, honestly. I've heard them all. The church is God's agent. This is so important. The church is God's agent of transformation. God uses the church to bring about transformation in people's lives personally, culturally, and ultimately globally. As Crawford Larit says, I love this quote by Crawford. He said this a couple years ago when he was here with us. He says, the church the community of the church, represents the destination at which culture ultimately needs to arrive. That the church, in other words, when we're hitting on all cylinders, which is an imagery that doesn't work anymore, when the church is hitting on all batteries, I don't even know if that's gonna make it to, anyway, when the church is operating the way that the church should operate, that the church and the church community, the way we love each other and the way we care for each other and the way we care for the community and our morality and our ethics, the church should represent the destination in which all of culture should arrive. In other words, if everybody in our community loved each other and treated each other the way we love and treat each other, our community would be a better place theoretically if we're getting this right. So for the sake of this generation, and for the sake of the next generation, we have to get this right. Because our church has to be healthy. It needs to continue to be outward facing. It needs to continue to be authentic and relevant. And one of the biggest challenges for me as a pastor, really for any pastor, but I'm afraid too many pastors have given up. One of the biggest challenges for us is to continue to be an outward facing congregation that cares more about who is out there than simply what we're getting in terms of us. You know, it can't become about us. And every organization becomes about itself over time. And churches are notorious for that. And you and all of you and all of our campuses around the city and around the country and around the world, you have successfully maintained this outward facing posture that at times is awkward and difficult and costly, but it is the way forward because the church really is the hope of the world because we are the body and the activity of Jesus in our world and in our culture. So for the sake of the next generation, we have to continue to get this right. We have to continue to make sure that our church is on mission and on message. And the mission and the message is the mission and the message of Jesus. So honestly, as you can't tell, I'm more passionate about this than ever. And I want us as a group of local churches and a local community and an expanding community of churches, I want us to continue to lead the way in this because churches are becoming so inside focused. It's rippling throughout our country politically in all kinds of different ways as churches begin to kind of build walls and batten down the hatches and we got to take care of our own. And I'm like, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. Because Jesus didn't do that. For God so loved the world, he didn't build a wall and try to, protect himself from us sinners. For God so loved the world, he moved in our direction and he came to live as one of us, among us, so we could know what our Father was like. And when the angels announced his arrival, gosh, I don't know why it's so easy to forget this. When the angels announced his arrival, it was good news of great joy. For all the people who can fit within for all people of all generations, of every language group, of every ethnicity. Sorry, I was about to say another word. Ethnicity of, for people of all ages. This was for all people, right? So we've got to continue to lead the way. Now, if you're like me, and most of you are, I love our country. I mean, I'm so patriotic. I love our country. But the truth is, and the truth is, our nation is never going to be healthier than the local church, and our nation is never going to be healthier than the influence of outward-facing local churches that understand the mission and the message of Jesus. Because this is a really big deal. And the reason that's true, the reason I make that statement is this, because the church provides the strongest, I would say the only, but I'll cut the other group some slack. The church provides the strongest argument for dignity of the individual and human rights. If all there is to this world is this world, if all there is matter, chemistry doesn't care about other people, biology doesn't care about other people, natural evolution doesn't care about other people, the only ethic, or I should say the only apologetic for the fact that we should care for one another and care for people who are like us and unlike us and who don't like us, the only apologetic for that is Christianity, the teaching of Jesus. So the church provides the strongest argument for that. This is why if you're not a Jesus follower, but you care about people, in fact, you hate injustice in the world, you should consider following Jesus, even if you're not sure you think Jesus is who we think Jesus is, because Jesus is the one that launched this ethic in such a way that it rippled all throughout culture and throughout the world. It was Jesus. We forget this. In fact, some of you don't know this or never thought about this, and you're not even gonna believe it when I tell you. But it was Jesus and the church and his followers that insisted that everybody has dignity and everybody has value because everybody is an image bearer. In other words, the church has always taught, and Jesus taught, you've never sat across the table from anyone who wasn't made in the image of God. You've never met anyone who wasn't made in the image of God. Therefore, there is built-in dignity, and people deserve respect. It is intuitive to us, but not because it's intuitive. It's intuitive to us because of the teaching of Jesus and because of the shadow of Christianity that cast its shadow across our nation and across many parts of the world, but not every part of the world. And that's why this is so important. Listen, to those who want to undermine the influence of the church, and to those who want to undermine the influence and the presence and the importance of the church, you should be careful what you wish for, because you will not like what you get. Here's a brand new statistic that came out. Some research was just done, and I know you're not even gonna believe what I'm about to show you, so you know, check it for yourself. According to this new research with this very reputable organization, you ready for this? Christian Philanthropy accounted for 70%, not religious, Christian, for 70% of all American philanthropy in 2022. 70%. This is Christians, churches, and Christian organizations. Do you want that to go away? If this goes away, our church is poorer. Our nation is poor. If this goes away, our nation is less others first. The church continues to make a huge impact. And then this represents like over $300 billion given away to do great things in our country. But get this is amazing. This is the one you're not gonna believe. Christians outgave the US government in addressing global poverty last year. Christian organizations, churches, charitable funds, and nonprofit organizations outgave the US government in addressing global poverty last year. That is a big deal. That's what you are a part of, or that's what you should be a part of, and that's what I want you to become a part of. Because as the church is stronger, the world is better. As the church is stronger, the US is more generous. As the church is stronger, people's lives are impacted. And they get better. Listen to this, of the top 50 largest and most healthy charities in the US, 40 of the 50 are faith-based. I love this quote by Philip Yancey. I've shared it with you before. I will probably share it with you forever. This is from his amazing book he wrote years ago called Vanishing Grace. Here's what he writes. He says, those who condemn the church for its blind spots. And of course we have blind spots. The amazing thing about the church, we're gonna talk about this in about 2.5 months, is that the church has a self-correcting mechanism on the inside. But from time to time, churches and the church does crazy things. He says, for those who condemn the church for its blind spots, they do so by gospel principles. In other words, the very principles that people outside the church use to hold the church accountable are actually principles that came from Jesus, arguing for the very moral values that the gospel originally set loose in the world. In other words, when people say, we need justice and we need human rights and we need, they're actually leveraging the teaching of Jesus, whether they know it or not. Here's what he goes on to say, and there's so much evidence for this. I've shared some of that with you before. He writes, human rights, civil rights, women's rights, minority rights, gay rights, disability rights, animal rights. The success of these modern movements, these are all modern movements. The success of these modern movements reflect a widespread empathy for the oppressed that has no precedent in the ancient world. Again, what is intuitive to us is not intuitive, we learned it. What is self-evident to us about the dignity that other people deserve, it is not self-evident, we learned it. And we learned it was launched by the teaching of Jesus. He goes on, he says this, classical philosophers considered mercy and pity to be character defects. To be generous to somebody who didn't earn it was a character defect. To show compassion for someone who doesn't have anything to do with you and you can't get anything from them and there's no benefit for showing compassion, that was considered a character defect. Nobody celebrated you for that. Contrary to justice, not until Jesus, this is so documented, not until Jesus did that attitude change? It was Christianity, not religion. It was Christianity, not religion in general, that shaped and reshaped the ancient world and continues to shape and reshape our current world. What was not self-evident, the intrinsic value of the individual, became self-evident because of the church and the teaching of Jesus. Government, which is so important, is necessary. Do you know what the government can do? The government can tell us how low we can go before we go to jail. That's what the government can do for us in this regard. And the media tells us how low we've gone, right? So who's gonna challenge us to live beyond the letter of the law? Who's gonna challenge us to character? Who's gonna challenge us to self-control? Who's gonna challenge us to ascribe to everyone around us dignity based on the image of God? Who inspires us to exercise self-control, not for the benefit of ourselves, but who inspires us to exercise self-control for the benefit of some other selves? And if you don't remember anything else, who instructed us to do the one thing that would change everything if everyone did it? Who instructed us to do the one thing that would change everything within a month if everyone did it? To love your neighbor as yourself. Who stewards the mandate to raise the bar even higher? To love your neighbor as Christ loved you. Only the church, only you, only us. So if you're a Jesus follower or a believer, if you're a Jesus follower or a believer, or you consider yourself a Christian, here's the challenge for us. Here's the challenge for you, not for me, for us. We are the stewards of the church, of our generation. It is up to us. It is up to us because God has given us the privilege of stewarding the church and the influence of the church in our communities, in our world, in our nation to us. We are stewards of the church of our generation. And here's what's at stake. I'm gonna show you a picture. And here's who's at stake. This picture is very emotional. I'm gonna try to get through this quick because it's always emotional to talk about this picture. It's one of my favorite pictures. I took it myself on my phone. 2018 or 19, I can't remember. We gathered all the seniors, we gathered all the seniors from all our student ministries in the Atlanta area. 617 high school seniors, not high school students, high school seniors crammed into this auditorium at a campsite, or a conference center not too far from here. And they wanted me to speak. And we had just finished singing for about 40 minutes. It's one thing to be around hundreds of high school students, but this is in the spring. So they have finished Christmas. They know what they're gonna do. It's the dynamic in the room is unexplainable. 600 plus high school seniors. When they finished singing, I was so emotional, I couldn't get my act together. So as a stall, I walked this little tiny little stage. I mean, they're crammed all around me. I walk up on the stage, and just to kind of stall, I get my phone out and say, hey, I want to take your picture. And I'm just trying to get my act together because I got to speak. So I took this picture. So if I ever walk out here and say I want to take your picture, it's not because you're beautiful, okay? It's because, I'm just kidding. So I take this picture, okay? This is why we do this. This is the future church. How are we going to leave it? Better than we found it, stronger than we found it, more outward facing than we found it? Is our message for this generation, it is good news of great joy for all people, including your people. So last week, if you were here, if you weren't here, now you know. Last week, I asked all of you to engage with us in a meaningful, in a significant way to ensure that this generation and the next generation has a church that's strong, that's able to develop a faith of their own. And fortunately, I was so proud of you. Hundreds of you from all of our campuses responded. You went to the website and you signed up to come to a 1-hour information meeting to find out how you can engage. So today, I'm back and I'm asking again. And the reason I'm asking again is because this is so important. And I'm asking again because I don't want you to miss it. And I'm asking again because our opportunity is bigger than ever and maybe it's more important than ever. I'm asking you to engage with us with your time and with your money in a significant way to ensure that we maximize our potential in our communities and in our nation and in the world. and to maximize the influence of the Big C church, because so many churches and so many church leaders look to us. We're always, not always in every area, but always just a little bit ahead, pushing the envelope appropriately to ensure that the message of Jesus continues to be a wide open, open-armed message. So here's the challenge, all right? Most Christians, I hate to say this, most Christians are content to consume. They just are. They take what they need, do what's convenient, don't do much of what's inconvenient. Only give, when the preacher presses hard, there's something specific to give to, They believe, but they don't necessarily follow. That's why I changed the language about 12, 15 years ago. And this is part of our challenge, the larger the church, the easier it is to do nothing other than just consume. Show up when you're there because I know you're always going to be there. I mean, the church, I heard an analogy like this. The church is like the gas station on the country road, the deserted country road, and you pass it over and over and over and over and over. You don't pay any attention to it until you need it and you're out of gas and suddenly you're glad it's there. And it's been there the whole time. And for many of you, that's been your approach to the local church. Glad it's there, don't need it, not sure I'll ever need it, but I hope when I need it, the doors are open and somebody's there to meet me at the door to help me. And we're always gonna be that kind of church. But the larger it is, the easier it is for you to slip in and slip out. And I know what you do, I get this, I'm human. You walk in and go, this church doesn't need me, they don't need anything. Goodness gracious, right? But here's my challenge. Look up here, everybody. Don't be most Christians, because you're better than that. And you know better than that. And you're smart enough to know that you should be better than that. Let's all be better than that. Because everywhere you look, people are telling us, and you probably don't read this stuff the way I read it because, I'm professional and I pay attention to all this stuff. But everywhere you look, people are assuring us the church in America is dying. It's going away. The church is on the brink of becoming like the church in Canada or the church in Europe. No offense to the Canadians or the people from Europe, okay? But I've talked to those pastors. In fact, in January, I was on a panel with some pastors, and one of the pastors on there is from Canada. In fact, he planted a church in Canada. He's been part of our church network. And he said to this group of mostly American pastors, don't let happen in the United States what has happened in Canada to the local church and the influence or the lack of influence in the local church. Support it. Show up for it. Give to it. Because once that influence is gone, it's virtually impossible to get it back. And here's the thing. I know you don't think this way because you're busy, you're raising kids and trying to take care of your parents, and there's so much going on. But it's not me, and it's not this building. It's not the building you're sitting in. You are the church. You are our church. You are your church. And I know you're busy. We built this. We've done all this for all these years with busy people. People who didn't have time, as I said last time, but people who made time. And perhaps it's time for some of you who love your local church to make time and to create capacity to ensure that we continue to be what God has called us to be, to do what God has called us to do, because there are so many things yet to be done. To do for this generation what perhaps a previous generation did for you as they did for me, or to do for this generation and the next generation what you wish someone had done for you. For some of you, it's time to commit to a plan for how you're gonna support this local church or your local church financially. Everybody in the country, even if they don't go to church, should have a plan for how they support a local church financially, because you don't want the local church to go away. The reason we don't know that's a big deal is because we've always lived in a nation where there were plenty of healthy churches, and you don't want it to go away. Whether you attend or not, you should find a local church that you believe is making a difference in the community, and you should support that church financially. And if your kids are away at college and they found a church they love, you should support that church financially. Everybody, certainly every Jesus follower. In fact, if you're not supporting the local church financially, you're not a Jesus follower. You're just a Christian. You're just a believer. But if you can't support the body of Christ financially with, what is tangible, you're a good person. We'll all work it out in heaven someday. But don't kid yourself. Read the New Testament, read the Gospels. You're not following. To those of you who've continued to carry the weight for all of our churches financially in terms of service, again, I can't preach a sermon like this and not say thank you, thank you, thank you. But to those of you, and I get it, we're a big church, in and out, what time, how long is this gonna go? I get that. But for those of you who just show up and get what you can, then head to the car, you owe that other group a huge debt of gratitude. And I know you probably know that. But more importantly, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your kids to join them to ensure that your church, our church, remains on mission and on message. This is your opportunity. It's what it is. It's an opportunity. This is your opportunity to do for others what others have been doing for you. This is your opportunity to do for others what others have been doing for you and will continue to do for you, whether you return the favor or not. Because that's the nature of the local church. It's God's agent for transformation personally, culturally, community, and globally. He used it to transform my life. I imagine for many of you, he's used it to transform yours as well. It's his agent for transformation in the whole world. And the church, last thing, the church is your opportunity to take part in that transformation. So I hope you won't miss that opportunity. At this time, I'm gonna ask somebody at your local campus to come up and give you some next steps, and I'll do that here.
Before we talk about how to serve, I mentioned earlier that I get to work with students at our church. I would love to take you to lunch and tell you stories of students and small group leaders connecting and learning about how much God loves us. I mentioned my friend Braden is a small group leader with me in transit. He's one of the many students whose lives have been impacted by individuals just like you who have decided to give of their time, talents, and resources. God will use you to make an impact, and Braden's story is proof.
Hi, my name is Brandon Carney. I'm a senior at Whitewater High School, but I also serve as a small group leader here at Transit. So the day I decided to sign up for Transit was just an ordinary Sunday, and the person on stage they were doing their whole message about how you can serve here at Southside. So I filled out the form that was behind the seat, and I basically put down I wanted to be a Transit small group leader. And then later that afternoon, I got a text from the transit director, and he was like, hey, I'd love to come meet you, see where you can fit in on the team here, and love to get lunch with you or dinner sometime. And since then, been a leader. Growing up, going to transit since I was in the 7th grade, I kind of always loved the environment there and always wanted to be a part of it. And that's kind of something I wanted to give to kids who were like me, and be able to have that opportunity here at Southside has been amazing. Since I started leading the group that I have, I've really started investing in my small group that I have with Inside Out, which is our high school ministry here at Southside. And for me, it's really been life-changing because the wisdom I get from Brad and Chuck, my 2 small group leaders, has been tremendous in my life. And I've been able to pass that wisdom down to my 8th graders, but also it gives me someone to talk to. They're not just my small group leaders at IO, but they're also, I consider them friends. And at IO, we really preach family is here. And that's something that I feel like is very important with Southside, because every time I enter the building, I feel like it's just family. It feels like home to me. All the connections, all the community that I've built here, it's just so great. What I'd say to someone who's hesitant about signing up because they feel like they're not gonna be able to lead the group right, or they just feel like they don't have the skills to do it, I would say I felt that way too. I felt very scared. I was very hesitant of would I be able to do this? But they reassured me, no matter what, we have your back, and along this journey, we're gonna be with you.
I'm thankful for stories like Braden's. I'm thankful for people like Brad and Chuck who took a step to join in the story that God is writing for the next generation. There are so many stories like these waiting to be lived out, and it starts with you. You can go to our website, southside.org/serve. Click on the area you're interested in and fill out the form. Taking the step does not commit you to serve, it just starts the conversation. A staff member will be in contact with you about the next steps after that. God has given us all gifts and talents. I can tell you there is nothing more satisfying or fulfilling than using those talents to serve others, especially the next generation. I can't wait to see the impact you will have on your community. Thank you for spending the time with us today. Have a great week, and we'll see you back here next Sunday.